Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking here, first of all. So, like Raminder said, I think uh, to start off with, everybody has by now heard of this certification called VCDX. And I think I heard of it first about 4 years ago. And during that time, it was like something which was totally out of my radar, right? Which is normal because of work and personal stuff, and it's just I just felt it was something too high to aspire to, right? From there on, how the journey shaped me, and then how I ended up getting the number, and how it helped me along the way is what I'm going to talk about, right? So we would like to keep the session interactive. Uh, Please feel free to stop, ask for clarification, or ask me any questions that you have. But I hope at the end of the presentation, you would feel inspired, definitely, and at least feel that it is something that is within your reach, and not something that is, just for somebody else, right? I think that's what I would aim for as part of this presentation. So just to start off with and set the context, let me, yeah. So we will talk about the certification itself, because though I stated that most people would be aware of what it entails and what the certification is, I still want to just start off with a brief introduction. And then we will talk about the process. And as I talk about the process, I will also talk about my experience. And then we will talk about some do's and don'ts, wherein these are things which I've gathered from different people and from my personal experience, not something that you would probably find listed on the formal sessions or on the internet. And then we will talk about some of the most common questions that I hear from people. So I've spoken to various audiences on VCDX, including on VMworld and in Empower. So most of the time we get similar types of questions, right? So we will talk about those as well. And then at the end, we will take some pending or leftover questions, if any. So to start off with, like I said, VCDX is the end of the path in terms of VMware certifications. When we say end, it is a certification that doesn't expire per se, but it does require you to constantly keep updating your skills. So they provide like these short update certifications to keep yourself up to date. But then to start off with, I think nowadays in the industry, most people have a VCP, right? Or at least are confident that a VCP is well within their reach. If you're working in the field, then it is definitely within the reach, right? And then after VCP is where people start thinking whether it is worth going ahead. Would I be able to do it? Would it be something that I start off with, but I'm not able to complete the journey? And when I started off on this whole thought process of whether to get into this preparatory group, the first thing that I noticed is that there were very few people in India who did this, right? So I started asking around, saying, why was it the case, right? Is it just the cost, because it is a pretty expensive certification, or is it that folks in India are not able to demonstrate their skills as effectively as others? Because I know there are a lot of skilled folks, but if there are absolutely a lesser percentage of people from India doing the certification, these were the first few questions that I had, right? And what I found out is that at least until pre-COVID times, the certification requires you to travel and present in front of a panel, which was difficult for quite a few people, right? So that was one challenge. And then the other part is there were a lot of folks from India doing it, but most of them did not stay back in India afterwards, right? So either they completed it while they were abroad, or they did the certification and immediately moved, right? So that is probably why you would not find many people on the VCDX directory listed with their location as India, right? But still the number was very low, okay? So just to start with the journey, you, like I said, do a VCP, and then you do a VCAP, and VCAP has a design and a deployment exam, right, which is true for most of the tracks. When I did NV, we did not have a design certification. There was only a deploy, so it was a little bit easier. But then most of the tracks have a design and deploy certification. Right now, I think even the NV track has it. And then, then after you meet this criteria, uh, then you can go into having a VCDX application, right? It's your eligibility to even submit an application. And I have not covered two other tracks on this slide, which is the desktop and mobility path. So there are 5 paths that you can take depending on your area of expertise. And yes, you can do multiple VCDXs. There are people with 2 VCDXs. There are people with 3. So it is definitely possible to do multiple VCDXs. If you complete one VCDX, then for the second VCDX, you just need to cover one section. So when I talk about the process, I will probably touch upon that as well, right? So it gets a little easier. And now because of the COVID restrictions, they are currently avoiding travel and doing remote evaluations, right? So that is another advantage for people who are aspiring to do a VCDX, and it is probably a better time for especially people in India, right? Because most of the time the panel happens either in the US or in the UK or in Sydney. And sometimes I've heard in Singapore, but not very frequently. Right. So I see a couple of questions on the chat. I will read the questions on the chat a little later. If folks want to unmute and ask, that is also fine. Right.
Sure. So if
Okay.
anybody wants to ask questions in between and they want to unmute, please raise your hand. Pranay will actually add you to promote you to a panelist, and then you can unmute and ask the questions. Right.
Yeah, because opening chat might be, disturb the flow. So chat questions probably we will take in the end. But yeah, if you do want to ask questions on call, then we're most welcome.
Sure.
All right. So going on with how I actually decided to do this certification. Like I said, when I first heard of it, I thought it was absolutely out of reach. But then the whole wish to, kind of prove to myself, and this was a new field that I entered into. I'm not a core VMware person in my career. So once I entered the field, I found it really interesting. And I kind of wanted to prove to myself and, make a mark and see what I could, how far I could go, right? So that was kind of what piqued my interest. Looking at, what it entails, right? Because sometimes the fear of the unknown is more than actually knowing what it entails. And once I understood exactly what is required for a VCDX, it still seemed difficult. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't lie and say it didn't seem difficult, but it at least seemed to be something that I could work with, right? Not something that was in the impossible range. So knowledge is power always, which is what I hope to give as part of this presentation, right? So from a path perspective, like I said, this is the formal path that is available, and it is available on VMware's site as well. They keep updating this depending on the certification version and tracks as well. So please refer to the site, the VMware site directly for up-to-date information. Okay. So this is a common question that I am asked, and I also asked this question in the beginning, because most of the time we see vendors providing high-level certifications in their own product, right? So if you're an expert on their product, then you can say, if a product is deployed incorrectly and you can fix it, or you can talk about in-depth configuration on a particular product, then you're an expert, right? But very technology. A passion for technology is what gets you started, but the certification itself is is a evaluation for your skill as an architect, right? So when you say a person is an architect, it doesn't mean that they just know technology well, right? They also should know how to articulate what they mean to say and make the other person feel heard, right? So if you're talking to a customer, you're not going to be like a sales guy in the shop who just says, my product has this feature, it can go, it can last you for 10 years, it can do this, it can do that, right? It's also about understanding what your customer wants. Certification tests your skills on various aspects of being an architect. So the short answer to this question is no, it is not a technical certification. It is not enough if you just have technical skill to clear this, right? So what we typically recommend is that if you have exposure in terms of your current job, where you are in a role where you face customers, then you're probably good to go, right? You won't need any additional preparation on that front. But if you're in a backend role, you've been like purely hands down technology, you do get on customer calls, but more from a break fix standpoint, then probably you need to factor in time for the preparation of the customer facing aspects, right? So that is one thing that I learned early on in the journey. And I put decision making here is because it is a decision, right? Because it is going to take out a large chunk of time from your personal life. So when I started the preparation, uh, I had planned to give about 4 hours of my day. And considering that we're all working, we have our families, taking 4 hours out every day is actually quite a bit of a challenge, right? So you do say 2 hours late in the night, 2 hours early in the morning, or you have to kind of fit it in around your day. And that has to be a commitment for about, say, depending on where you are on the journey and where you, like I said, if you're comfortable talking to customers, then probably the time could be lesser. But then on an average, it takes at least 3 to 4 months. Okay, so that's the timeline that we're looking at. So before you start, it is better that you kind of mentally prepare yourself that yes, it is going to be a long amount of time to invest, but if you feel it is worth it, then it's, if you look at it from a long-term perspective, 4 months is hardly anything, right? And that includes preparing the application package, and then you have the defense, which is what I was talking about, that happens in person, and currently it is happening remotely. And then you also kind of have to remember that while you're preparing in these 4 months, you are going to get trained by the best of the best, right? So the preparation process is never done as an individual, right? There's a large community of people out there, and everybody is willing to help. So you think of it this way, that you're getting free training uh, from the best experts of the world as to how to become an architect, an expert architect, right? So that is the kind of journey that you go on. So I've heard from a lot of people who have attempted the certification and did not say clear it the first time. They are still happy, and they see a value in their day-to-day jobs, right? They've sometimes applied for better positions. They've sometimes moved on to different organizations with a better position because they have more confidence now. They know how to talk. They know how to, articulate and get the answers across to a panelist, right? So that whole process, including, I would say, some of the most lasting things as part of the journey is, of course, the skills acquired, but also the contacts that you get, right? So there's, like I said, this large community of people who helps you for, say, 4 months. You definitely get to know them, right? And these are people across the world in different organizations, different fields within VMware. So you build this whole community of people whom you can reach out to throughout your career, right? So that is something really unique and special about this whole preparation. So I'll just quickly pause here for any questions.
So if you have any question, you can raise hands and I'll allow you to talk. Or you can also ask a question in Q&A section. So we have one question. Let me unmute Amish. Yeah, you can speak.
See, this VCDX is also somewhat a hands-on for this, just like CCI.
Not really. So the hands-on part they cover in the previous exams, right? So by the time you finish, by the time you finish VCAP, you've cleared the hands-on part wherein you cover troubleshooting, you cover fresh configuration, right? Break fix kind of issues. So all that is covered in VCAP. What they look for in a VCDX is, like I said, not just technology, but your skill as an architect, right? So which means, how do you connect the dots? How do you get the requirement from a customer? How do you capture that requirement and put it across, right? But they also check your technical skills in terms of when you go into the panel and face the panel, right? Then they can ask you anything ranging from your logic behind a particular decision to how you would configure something.
So it's a primarily for requirement for a pre-sales or solution architect guys, right? So if
Yes,
someone is working on it.
Yes, so if someone has pre-sales or solution architecture exposure, it is a lot easier. If not, then it is a good way to move into the architecture space, right? Not pre-sales, I won't say entirely. Pre-sales experience will help, but you do have to have in-depth technical knowledge as well, right? Because they could go from, not just saying how would you sell this product, but also to why specifically did you take this decision? Why not something else, right? And how would you actually configure this if this particular thing did not work? Okay, so I mean, it is a combination of both, right? Which is what an architect requires.
So will it cover the, I mean, there are different modules, as you say, right? So the VCDS is covering the entire VM portfolio, VMware portfolio, or it is specific to the specific technology, like says the data center, right? Or the cloud, or the HCI solutions, or the VDI. So
right. So the first slide in the deck, what I showed was there are actually about 5 tracks.
I had to wear my glasses.
No, it was very small, I know. I tried making it bigger, but somehow it didn't. So there are 5 tracks. There is a data center track, there is a networking track, there is a cloud track, an EUC track, right? So what each track does is it will specialize on that particular technology. But yes, for example, I did the networking track, right? So doesn't mean that I will know only NSX, right? Because NSX
so actually
is built on
you
top
cover
of
the
NSX,
which is the latest one, right?
Correct.
Right. So which is the most lucrative in the market.
Exactly. And NSX runs on top of ESXi. It works with vCenter, right? So you are expected to be an expert on vSphere and vCenter no matter what. The other aspects, like say vSAN, SRM, things like that, they may not focus on too much if you do an NV exam, right? But if you do a DCV exam, then those would be very much in your area of focus. So if, for example, you say that I am aware of vSAN, I know the concept, but I am not an expert in vSAN, That's okay if you're attempting an NV exam.
So when the panel asked about these NSX, let's assume, right? So they also asked about the competition like the ACI, the Cisco ACI, and the Arista or the Nutanix,
They
the
can.
microsegmentation.
They can. So the way the panel asks questions is, I mean, they remember the panel are also VCDXs. They also come with years of experience with working on multiple products, right? So I've heard instances of people asking questions which are not exactly VMware. And if you know the answer, you can talk about it. But if you don't, it's all right.
Okay, fair enough.
But at least you should have a basic knowledge of it, right? You can't say I've never heard of the biggest competition. Like,
Yeah,
for example,
exactly. I mean, when you go to the market, then there are a lot of vendors, not only the NSX. There are at least 10 vendors.
Correct. So you can't say I've never heard of ACI, but you wouldn't be expected to know, say, how to configure an EPG. What is the difference between that and NSX, right? That as an example. But yeah, if you know what the product is, they may lead you down that path and have a conversation. But as we go through the process, you will see probably why that might not be a good idea. Okay, so I'll just give you a brief on the process, and that should probably help with getting a little more clarity. Okay. So the first step is the application package, which means once you decide that, okay, I'm going to do a VCDX, the best way to attempt it is if you already have a customer facing design that you've either done or worked with somebody on, right? The reason we say that you should have a working design is not because it is impossible to submit a hypothetical design or that VMware won't accept it. You are welcome to provide designs that you create in theory and have not implemented. It's just that they will check for whether your design can work, right? So if it is hypothetical, most often what happens is during cross-questioning, you tend to contradict yourself, right? Because it is hypothetical. You may not have all the details exactly down versus a real design wherein, you know, you tried and tested it, it's been put through the fire, you know, it's working in a customer environment, then it has less chances of you contradicting your own statements, right? But there are a lot of people who go ahead with hypothetical designs. It's just that it will take a little more time for you to ensure that there is no contradictory statement within your own document, right? So that is the first step. So once you have this clear design in mind, you've got to put it down in a document. Okay, so the application that you submit for VCDX, it consists of these 5 documents that you see on the screen. The architecture is just one, right? But that is the main document that they look at. So that's got to be, again, there is no size limitation. I've seen people submitting architecture document, which is 1,000 pages long, and I've seen 20, 25 pages as well, right? And I've seen both getting through. So what it requires is certain parameters which we will talk about, but the size or the length of it, of your document does not really count, right? Apart from that, you're supposed to submit an installation guide. Installation guide is basically the key parts of your design. How are you implementing it, which is what you cover in your VCAP, right? So the guide should be at a level of not a layman following it, but a VMware expert following it. So a BCP guy, if he reads your installation guide, he should know how to deploy your solution. Okay. It sounds complex, but there are ways to get it done easily. You can, for say procedures of how to install a particular software, you can even reference links from VMware directly on your document, right? Apart from that, you can put, say, configuration values in a table, anything specific to your design, you call it out, but the entire step of how a particular product has to be installed or set up, you can just add a link to VMware official sites as well. They accept that, right? The next is the implementation plan. Implementation plan is a project plan where you talk about who is doing the project implementation, how big is the team, what is the timeline. So if you've worked on a live project, then probably you've seen these kind of plans, right? What is the timeline? What are the roles of the people? and how is it going to be split into phases, right? What are the phases involved, things like that. And then there is a test plan. Test plan is how your design was tested. And there you basically just have to show that all the requirements that you've called out or captured as part of your design, how are you testing it and meeting that requirement, right? So for example, if a customer says, I need an availability SLA of 99.9%. So you've got to show in your test plan, how are you achieving that SLA, right? That is what a test plan is. And again, you just need to show this for the key components, right? So the key asks that the customer has, the SLAs, if you have a DR component in your architecture, right? How do you execute that DR? Are you meeting your DR SLAs? Those kind of things is what you need to show in your test plan. And then you have the standard operating procedures. This again, you don't need to list every specific operating procedure, but the key operating procedures you listed so that people kind of get an idea of what is required to run your design, right? So one thing that I realized as I was preparing is it is not just about designing and walking away, right? They actually want to see if your design can be operationalized. So they could say, ask you about a process issue, right, in your design. So for example, since I did NV, I'll give an example from that. Suppose you have firewalls of different vendors in your environment. You also have NSX running, right? So they could ask you something like, how do you ensure that the policy is kept the same across other vendor firewalls and NSX firewall, right? Technically, it's not a VMware question, but operationally for a customer, it is a genuine question, right? You have your VMware product, you have non-VMware products. How do you ensure that they are all in sync, right? So these are the kind of questions that could come up because they also want to ensure that your design can be operationalized, right? And to prepare this application package, they have given a blueprint, and this blueprint is specific to every track. So you've got to kind of by heart the blueprint, know it before you actually start creating these documents, and then follow it clearly. Now, in spite of doing all that, if I'm really honest with all of you, I redid the architecture document 3 times. Okay, and I had a live design with me, as in it was implemented. The customer is still running it, in fact. But then, in spite of that, the first time I wrote it, the logic of the flow was not correct, right? So for a third person, when they read it, they were not able to clearly map the flow of my thought process, right? So I rewrote it again. And the second time around, there were some gaps in the logic, which again got spotted by other experts, right? So the more you allow people to critique your documents, the more inputs you get. But at the same time, as a side note here, it's better not to have too many people commenting on it, because again, this is a document. There are different ways of expressing. So one person's way of expression may not agree with another person, right? So if you have too many people, you will get too many inputs and you'll get confused as to what to do. So before you start this application package review, you've got to kind of decide who's your support group. Okay. So when we start with that document, you kind of get it reviewed in portions, I would suggest. So when we start, you've got to have a flow. In the architecture document, you don't just go and start off writing your design saying, my design had this, my design had that, right? They look for a flow as to how you are meeting the customer's business deliverables. So first you've got to state a challenge. What was the customer's challenge in terms of business? Not that, my customer was having repeated downtimes, or, they were having issues with capacity, right? Those are more of technical requirements. What you need to capture is more of their business deliverables, right? Do they need to optimize the hardware footprint? Are they paying too much for, say they're running in a colo, they're paying too much for the space, they want to cut down on their budget, or they want to move to a more cloud-like architecture. They want to implement self-service, things like that, right? Those are the business deliverables. Now, from those business deliverables, you will derive the conceptual design. And when I started with this application, when people told me conceptual design, in my mind, it was a few boxes, right? I thought, okay, I will show at a high level, this is the network, this is the compute, this is how it all works together, this is how it will run. But that's not what they mean, right? Conceptual design, they mean is capturing the technical requirements, which you have to derive from the business deliverable. So you have to kind of say that, look, because this is a business challenge for the customer, I have interpreted it as an architect, and I think these are the 3-4 technical requirements that come out of it, right? And the key there, and the reason why I rewrote my document 3 times, is you have to show that thought process in your document, which means you've got to kind of map that business deliverable to the technical requirements that you're translating it to, right? Followed by that, while you are deriving these requirements, you are also expected to identify the risks, the assumptions, and the constraints. Now, most of the time I see when so I also mentor a lot of folks, and most of the time people get confused with this word assumptions, right? I've seen applications where it's written, one of the assumptions is that my customer has 5 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds latency between the 2 data centers. So my question is, why is that an assumption? Is that something that you can't ask your customer? Do they not know what they have between their data centers, right? So when we say assumptions, we mean that it is something that you cannot validate during the course of your design. You may be able to validate later. So for example, if customer is buying a link from some vendor for inter-DC, at this point, they're not very sure what technology they're going with, right? They're still in discussion. Then you can put it as an assumption. And you have to state that if at the end of your design, that assumption cannot be validated, like you're not sure if they will get DCs with 5 millisecond latency between them, then that becomes a risk, right? So that is how you have to clearly define these risks, assumptions, and constraints. And once you define that all these 4 components constitute your conceptual design. Then you move on to your logical design, right? Logical design is kind of what I was talking about, the boxes. Again, here the expectation is that you derive this design from the technical requirements. So if you've stated that my customer has a capacity issue, right? So in terms of my technical requirements, what I think that translates to is I need to have better capacity monitoring tools. I need to bring in hardware which can, which is, say, if it's a CPU issue, then hardware with better packing ratios, or divide it into more than one cluster so that certain workloads can use the CPU cores more effectively, right? So whatever that technical requirement is that you've identified, you've kind of got to show the logical design. So when you say logical design, the confusing part again over there for me was, is it just going to be the design itself, or should I talk about at a very high level, right? So the guidance that I was given is that at a logical design level, it has to be vendor neutral, right? So whatever you state, it should not be very specific to VMware alone. That should be the level at which your logical design should stop. And that thumb rule, I found it quite useful, because when you typically start writing a design, especially as technical folks, we will tend to go into details, right? And then you move to the physical design. Physical design is the translation of the logical design. Again, here you're just expected to show a logical link between what component you've talked about in your logical design and your physical design. Like in logical, you might say, I'm using groups of hosts with a clustering technology, right? And in your physical design, you will say, I'm using 2 ESXi clusters. This is the configuration, right? This is how I'm designing the clusters, and why you're designing the clusters that way, right? So that's the example. And the last point on the slide is AMPRS, which is basically something that you have to remember while you're writing all these sections. What it means is that you've got to cover availability, manageability, performance, recoverability, and security. So this is what they actually evaluate you on. Right? So in the whole document, what they check for is not just your technical clarity, but also your approach. That is the key takeaway that I wanted to share from this slide. Right? So this kind of just recaps what I stated, except a couple of points here. Like I said, make it all about the customer. You, in every area, wherever possible, you tie it back to the customer requirement, right? You say that this is what the customer wanted, this is what their strategy was, their vision was, and that is why I have done this, right? And when I say showcase your decision-making process, how do you show that in your document? You say, I considered, these 3-4 options, and among these options, I chose this because of this reason, right? So it is all about your method, and hopefully that partially answers the question that I was asked. That this is kind of what they evaluate, right? They evaluate your method, your approach, and your technical skill, right? And things like, what if you had made a bad decision, right? If for example, you did something wrong in your design, and you've submitted your application package, and later somebody pointed it out to you that, this portion of your design is wrong. You could have done it differently. There is a better way of doing it, right? Now, if you already know about it, it's better that during the panel, you state it before they ask you, saying, I realized later that this portion of my design I could have done better. This is how I would have done it. It's sometimes, despite all the preparation, you will not spot these errors, and the panel will ask you, right? Saying, what if you have done this particular thing in this way? Wouldn't it be more effective? Now, I've seen some people taking the stand that it's better to defend your thought process rather than back off when the panel pinpoints something. But I would say in what has worked in most cases is if you try to listen to what the panel is saying, and if you feel that genuinely there is a way to defend your decision, you defend it. If not, it is better to accept that you made a mistake, right? They do understand that we're all humans and it is possible to make mistakes. Again, I'll just take a quick pause. Are there any questions on the previous few slides?
Yeah, so we have like, Kuldeep, you can ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Veronica, for this insightful session. Just one quick question, like where we just prepare for the DCV perspective, and my NSX is also the part of picture, like kind of SDDC solution we are proposing in this VCDX design. So till what level or till what extent we can present that compute design, and how much part we can take from network perspective, while NSX is also the part of solution.
Right. So when you are presenting a DCV design, your scoring will be more towards compute, right? So though you have NSX as part of the design, and you will be expected to show knowledge about it, if you have done a full-fledged implementation and you put it on your design document, then they could question you, right? So what people typically do is they tone down that NSX portion in the design document itself. They will either say they've implemented NSX for a small portion, or if they have implemented it for the entire compute environment, then keep it very simple, right? Don't make the design very complex, because though they will not get into detail, they could ask anything, right? As long as it's on your document, it's game. That's it.
Okay,
right?
but the expectation
the scoring,
is
correct. The scoring will be more towards DCV only. But you will still lose, you will still lose confidence, right? If the panel asks you something which you're absolutely not aware of. So more from that perspective, you keep it simple, right? They may not bother about your answer if you say, I don't know this particular point in NSX, but just saying I don't know on a call when you're in front of the panel, you're under pressure, that might work adversely for yourself, right? So for that reason, we say keep it simple. even if it is part of your design.
Yeah, absolutely. Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
And Veronica, we have few questions in chat box also from Sushil and Shiva.
Yeah, let me get that. It's the Q&A chat box, right?
It's direct chat box. Let me put it in Q&A.
That's fine. We'll check this. So officially, I think one of the questions, let me see. Do we have panelists in Singapore? So Singapore or any other location for that matter, they conduct the panel only if they have sufficient applicants for that region in that particular round. Okay, so for example, even if you prefer Singapore in that particular application submission round, if they don't get many people from APAC, then they will not have a panel in Singapore. So you will just say that I am submitting my application and my preference of location is this, but they will give you the options as to where you can go. So you've got to be open for that, right? And from what I hear, Singapore and even Sydney, there are only some particular technologies that happen, and that too not very frequently. I've had one of my contacts in this circle who waited for nearly a year and a half because he didn't want to travel and he was based in Sydney. Right, so you can take a look, like Raminder has stated, on the calendar, as well as there is a VCDX team that will update you based on the applications they receive. Okay. DCV is usually, is your certification still valid? 2018? It's 22 now, so I don't think it will be valid. Right, so you need to have a valid certification. You can't attempt a VCDX with an expired certification, right? It has to be currently valid. But yeah, recertifying, I think, won't be a big problem, at least for a VCP. VCP, can you go without attending VMware formal training? I think you do have a classroom training requirement for VCP. They did waive it off in between and said you can attend like a web-based training, but I think now they might start off again with a classroom kind of training option, right? But you do have that criteria. Okay, so Shiva, this question on whether there will be network and storage virtualization, that I think we just answered. So Shil, do we need to go through any official training for VCDX? Not directly for VCDX, no. But like I said, you will get unofficially grilled and trained by this whole large community of VCDXs and VCDX aspirants as well. Right? DCV about not expiring, I'm not very sure. As far as I heard last, it did, but then I'm not sure about what it is currently. Okay, so mentors, how do we get? Shiva, that's a great question. I've included a link at the end of this presentation. So basically, there is a VCDX directory, right? You can just Google VCDX directory, and it will take you to a list of VCDXs across the world and give you their regions, their tracks. And the reason region is important is because if you want to do calls with them, right, you have to consider your time zone. And then you can filter out by people who are ready to mentor on that now. So even otherwise, even if people have not selected that mentor option because it came up pretty recently, you can still reach out to people through that directory. And I mean, most folks, right, at least 80–90% of the folks, they do respond and they do spare time, right? So what we usually suggest is have a single mentor. Like I said, too many inputs on the document will confuse you. So go by one person's guidance. You can get a second opinion for certain parts where you say are not very comfortable. but then try and go with one person's guidance. And the other aspect of where you reach out to the whole community is you can do mock sessions, right? So like I said, you've got to go and face this panel. So you can do mock sessions of the panel with people. And for that, there is this good Slack group for VCDXs, wherein for every batch, right, there is a separate Slack group that is created, and people kind of get on that group and schedule mock sessions for each other. So all people who are aspiring for VCDX for that particular batch, they will do mock sessions for each other, and also former VCDXs are there. Right, so that kind of feedback really helps, and that's what I meant by saying that you will really get trained, whether you go through it till the end or not, but you will get rigorous training from a lot of people across the world, which is very useful. Right, so another quick point that I'll call out from this slide is if you have worked as a group on a particular design, right, they are very particular that you call out and credit the right people. So if you have worked with 3 or 4 people on your actual customer design, you can mention on the document that so and so worked with me. All you are expected to do is you are expected to know all portions of your design, irrespective of whether you did it or somebody else did it. Right, so you can't go into the panel and say, oh, you know, storage that guy designed, I'm not really sure how it was done, right? That's not acceptable. But you can definitely say another person did this. I'm not the expert, but I do know the design, right? So you can answer questions. And other points that I wanted to mention is you can have up to 3 people doing a single submission. Right, so if you feel that it is useful to team up with somebody, who you'll have to choose carefully, see that the person you're teaming up with has pretty much the same wavelength, can kind of work, you both can work to the same schedules, right? Typically in different time zones, it becomes difficult. And then probably split the work, right? You know, you do part of it, the other person can do part of it. Or if there are 3 people, split it among 3. And when you submit the design, all of you submit it together as the application package. But then in the panel, you will face the panel individually. Right, so that is another way to get the work done faster. Okay, so like I mentioned, in the panel, they will ask you to defend your decisions, right? And one of the key don'ts that we repeatedly keep finding people and telling them is that sometimes people end up saying, you know, this is what VMware validated design suggests, or this is VMware's best practice, right? So these things are not accepted. They pretty much want you to know why VMware considers it a best practice, right? That is why you're the VMware expert. So if a customer asks you, why is it done this particular way? You should basically be able to say, this is the reason why it is done this way, rather than saying it's a VMware best practice, right? And like I mentioned, other parts or other products, if you include in your design, you may be asked questions on that. So you can be careful about what you include, right? Don't just write thousands of pages and then you will probably leave an open book to anybody who's asking questions. So in the panel itself, they will try to focus on areas where your application was weak. Okay, so they will score you on the application. And this is what the defense looks like, right? You have 3 panelists. You will have a design defense of 75 minutes, and then you will have a design scenario of 45 minutes. Okay. So the design defense is where you will kind of go and present the design package, the application package that you created. You will present that design. Now, the questions they would have all read your application before coming, right? So they will not ask you very basic questions saying, explain your design. They will ask you questions on areas where they think your design was weak, or whether where they feel your document was not clear enough, right? And this is to help you score. So rather than just assuming that something was not there in your document, so you don't know it, they will ask you to clarify it and explain it. And if you do explain it, then it is still considered as, completion of the design. Right now, the biggest challenge in that is, of course, the time limit. Considering that we are technical folks, usually we will tend to go in depth for any question that is asked. So what we used to do an exercise when I prepared. If there is a technical question asked, like for example, what does DRS do, right? You practice answering it within 1 minute. Okay, so practice keeping your answers short. And then if the panelists feel that that's not enough detail, that they want more, they will ask you to go more in depth. Right, so keep it precise, but don't like go off into a 10-minute speech and then lose time, because the panelists may not stop you and say, okay, you're running out of time. So here, time management is entirely up to you. If you want to talk for 20 minutes about one topic, nobody is going to stop you. Right, so that is key. So while they will help you score in terms of the range of topics you covered, your time management is entirely up to you. So for the defense, you need to prepare a good PPT. Keep the PPT short. So the thumb rule they say is like you should be able to go through the entire deck in 15 minutes. So out of your 75 minutes, 15 minutes is for your deck. The rest could be, they could stop you in between the presentation. They could let you go through the presentation and then ask questions. But basically, you've got to keep your presentation short, like 10, 12 slides at the max, right? And then all the rest of your content that you want to show, you keep it as backup. You still keep it on your presentation, but you don't go through it unless you're asked questions about that topic. Like for example, if they say, what was your DBS design? Can you go in a little more detail? Or, how did you ensure that there was no conflict in no conflict in resourcing, right? That all the resource availability constraints were achieved. Then you could go to that specific backup slide and then you will explain that, right? So because in a short time, you've got to go through a lot of backup slides, you have to make the deck very easy to navigate. So keep a lot of shortcuts on the deck so that like for example, if you're talking about availability, then you keep some shortcuts as to how you're achieving availability for specific components on that same slide. So that if there is a question or a deep dive on a specific component, you just click that link and you go to that slide, right? So it's all about time management when it comes to your design defense, right? For the scenario, it's a different ask. Scenario, the panelists pretend to be customers. So till that time, they will be VCDXs, they will be asking you detailed questions. But suddenly in the scenario, they turn around and they become customers, which means if you talk about vMotion, they may say, what is vMotion, right? So you've got to be very basic, very non-technical in this portion. This is more like a pre-sales presentation, right? This portion of it. So here you've just got to get the requirement from the customer. You again show your method, show how you're capturing requirements, how you're translating it to a design, etc., etc. Use whiteboarding, make a lot of notes which are clear, which show your method. And then you just give a very high-level logical design, right? You're not expected to go into details. It's just about what your thought process is and how you're able to capture the ask from the customer. Okay, so most people practically struggle with this portion, right? The design portion, many people get through, and this portion, people assume that they will be able to do it, but they usually struggle with this, right? Mainly because there are broad amount of areas. The scenario could be anything pertaining to your technology. And then there is very less time, right, to express it. So when you do one VCDX and you're attempting your second one, then you don't have to go through this portion, right? So that is an added bonus if you go for your second VCDX. But this is basically the process that happens during the panel. So I know we are nearing the end of the presentation. We've reached the time mark. Just one point that I want to say, I've talked a lot about the experience. Whether I found personally having a VCDX useful, definitely yes. like I said, mainly because of the community, because of the relationships it has built. And I see a lot of improvement in my skill and my confidence level, right? And of course, you have better opportunities in the market, right? No denying that. So it is, I would say, considering your entire career, a 4-month investment is a short time. So definitely achievable and what do you call, worth it, at least in my experience and a lot of experiences that I've heard. And if you do not clear it as well, or if the application itself does not get accepted, then they provide pretty detailed feedback as to what went wrong. Section by section, they tell you, this portion, this section, this area you could have explained better, you could have done better. So it really helps you in the next attempt, right? So I will wind up with this. I've listed some useful links here. Like I mentioned, the Slack groups. There are VCDX preparation workshops that happen very frequently. There is a mentoring series which covers specific deep dive topics. And there is also the official VCDX directory where you can find mentors. Right, so we just have a couple of questions, I think, on the chat, so we can answer.
Yeah, we have a few questions in chat box.
Yep. All right, so you asked, Shiva, if we can use the same architecture design to prepare and present when you worked on an environment. Yes, you definitely can. And a lot of PSO folks do that. They use the designs that they have implemented. It's just that they have to get the customer ask very clearly and kind of map the ask to the design. Right? But you definitely can. And I would recommend that you use a light design. Right? And if you're attempting for a DCV, will there be cross-technology panelists like MD or CMA? Yes, there will be cross-technology panelists, but they will also have a VCDX DCV. Right? So it could be a panelist who is an expert on 2 areas, but they will definitely have DCV as well. And if not, it's not a rule, by the way, they will prefer that. If not, they will ask you questions which are pertaining to DCV only. So you don't need to worry about going into a DCV presentation and, just because the panelist doesn't know the technology, they're going too much into CMA, right? That won't happen because they have a set blueprint on which they have to evaluate. I hope that answers the question. There was one more question which I missed. Key deliverables, should they be technical or just a broader view? So key deliverables has to be broad. It is business deliverables. The technical requirements have to be derived from the key deliverables. Right. So I hope it was useful, and at least that I gave everyone an idea and hopefully made you see that the VCDX is well within everyone's reach.
Yeah, thank you so much, Veronica. It was really a wonderful session for our audience, and thank you everyone for joining this. And if you have any question regarding this, you can send us an email at delhi@vmug.com, and we'll also plan next session in coming months.